Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak in English, but I'm glad to be here with you today. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It was very funny to hear it read in French. And soon on the screen, you'll see a picture of my face. Hello. I was invited here to talk a bit about organizing and the way that we can change our communities and our lives together through organizing. And I've been organizing and campaigning for a number of years. As we were saying, around 2009, when Harper was in office, this was the moment that I was like, oh, politics matters and I can do something about it. And so I shall try. And ever since then, I've been a little bit hooked on activism and organizing at the local, national, and international level. I've done a lot of my work specifically focusing on climate justice and the fight against fossil fuel corporations, but I've taken a few side journeys from there into fighting other bad guys like the pharmaceutical industry, trying to stop us from having national pharmacare, for example. Yeah, I understand that the National Farmers Union, I'm new to you. My sister is a seed farmer, so I'm a big fan of farmers in general, but I won't pretend to have a great understanding of your organization, but I do understand that you have local and regional chapters or groups. And within these chapters, you take on a lot of different efforts and campaigns, education in your communities, which I think is just great. And so in my eyes, you're all organizers already. So I'm here to share a little bit about what I've learned over the years about what organizing is, how we can learn to do it together, and what the heck is going on today that we can succeed in. As was mentioned, I spent a long time fighting in the movement to stop the Alton Gas project in Nova Scotia. If you're from outside of the Maritimes, you might not have heard about this, but it was a really big, really dumb, really bad idea to store super high pressure natural gas deep underground in a hole and then burn it for stuff. This was a huge threat to the Punamu'kwati'jk River, and through that work, over the course of 7 years, I got to work really closely with a lot of Mi'kmaq water protectors and land defenders. And this really changed the way that I understand my relationship to land, and also the power that comes with relating to the land in such a important and foundational way. So I think I'm among friends here, and I'm glad to hang out and chat for a little while. I want to start with a silly story about myself. I moved house last summer, and it was the middle of July. It was horrible. It was a Tuesday. None of my friends were available because they were all at work. And so I had a couple of movers and me moving my whole life into a new house. And it was 35 degrees. And I was sweating so much carrying a big box. But I saw my new neighbor for the first time. And I thought it'd be very rude if I didn't go say hi to him when we made eye contact from across the yard. So I put down my enormous box and I went over to see my neighbor, Mickey, who's now my good friend. He's very cool, but he was sitting in his garage. He's got this real man cave situation, this big TV. And he's sitting there, he's still in his high-vis gear from work. He told me that he is a heavy machinery operator for different construction sites. And I learned that his wife, Steph, she's also lovely. She manages a pub nearby in our neighborhood. And the very first question that he asked me about myself was, what kind of treats can your dog have? And I was like, good God, man, don't feed my dog. She's old, she's special. And then the second question he asked me was what I do for work. And at the time, last summer, I was working at the Council of Canadians, which you may know is a organization, somewhat like this. There's chapters across the country. It has a broadly progressive, left-leaning political agenda. But I didn't really want to get into it. Sometimes you don't want to talk politics with a stranger. And I was very sweaty, as I mentioned. And so I was like, oh, work at a nonprofit. And he was like, yeah, but what does it do? And I was like, oh, God. So I was like, well, we think that global corporations shouldn't run everything, and the government should work for people and not the profits of businesses. And he was like, politics. Don't get me started about that pandemic. And I was like, oh, what are the words? What are the next words I'm going to hear? So I just said, uh-huh. And then he said, from his man cave, smoking a dart, wearing high vis, big boots, this man says, I can't believe how much money we gave to Pfizer and Moderna to make those vaccines, and that they didn't even have to pay tax that next year when they made so much money selling them. And I was like, a perfect opinion. Thank you, Mickey. And so Mickey had a perfect opinion, and I'm telling this story not to just show that my neighbor is very cool and I'm very lucky to live next door to him, but because what it showed me is that this is the kind of person that in a like lefty political world I haven't interacted with very much, honestly. I don't, most of my friends work in the same kinds of jobs as me. I don't know a lot of working class people or like blue collar workers in a really day-to-day way, but it was really eye-opening. And since then I've seen again and again people like Mickey and people like all of us and people all across political spectrums in this country can see that where we are right now in this like political moment and this economic structure, it's not working for anybody. Everybody can see the rich are getting so much richer than ever before, and the rest of us are losing much, much more severely than we ever have been. And this is happening, I think, because so many people are having a hard time just meeting their basic needs for living a decent life. So I have, sure. There we go. Here are some big words for you. I have a couple of big words sprinkled throughout. I think that this is a moment of real political rupture. And what that means is the status quo, the system, the normal way that things are working and have been working for decades, they're losing legitimacy. People no longer broadly believe that the system is working because most people are struggling in ways that they haven't before, or to a degree that is very new and very severe around trying to meet our basic needs. And so I think this is a moment of real political rupture, which presents a lot of opportunity for us to usher in a new structure, a new status quo, and a new way of being. So sorry, I'm looking at my notes and it's a little funny. So this is a bit scary because it's kind of destabilizing to be like, wow, everyone around me can see that this isn't working. But it's also a real opportunity because I'm sure I didn't get to attend your whole conference, but I flipped through the agenda and the, what are they called? Resolutions. Thank you. And I can see pretty clearly that we all probably agree we are in desperate need of an enormous change towards a much more functional democracy than the one we have right now, towards decolonization of the land and our society, and towards decarbonization of our energy systems so we don't burn this whole place down. And all of these things will require massive government intervention in the economy and in our societies at the scale that most of us have never witnessed before, which is fun and scary. And that massive government intervention also isn't enough on its own. We also need to address the very roots of the problems, which you've started doing today through some of the resolutions. We really need to be addressing also the government's role in colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy that's ongoing in this place. And I think that the way that our communities have been isolated from each other, which I think is quite structural and intentional, this leaves us unable to take advantage of this moment, or it leaves us in an unideal position to take advantage of this moment where most people are like, holy crap, this really isn't working. We've got to build something new because we're too separated. And so the answer to that to me is community organizing. This sounds maybe, sometimes when I think about the scope of all these things that I'm talking about, it's a little overwhelming, but I like to remember that this is not the first time in Canadian history, or certainly not the history of the world, that there have been these moments of massive political rupture. So I really want to look at my notes so I don't just blather forever here. Yeah, this is not the first time we've experienced this kind of political rupture where people are looking around and being like, wow, the way things used to work really isn't working. So I want to take us back for a very short, very brief history of the 1930s, our favorite time. There have been other political ruptures in Canada since, but I think this one is very exemplary for this moment. So back in the 1930s, there's a huge economic depression. We all know that. Massive unemployment, poverty, inequality. Oh, I've missed a few slides here. There we go. Past rupture. The Depression, we all know what that was about. We read the books, whatever. There was enormous inequality in the 1930s. And the status quo, the system of the economy at that time is called the liberal economy. So the basic idea was like, if you work hard and you take care of yourself, you and your family can have a good life. And the subtext of that is, and if you can't, tough bananas. And a lot of people through the 30s were getting those tough bananas. And we're looking around being like, this seems like some straight BS. This really isn't working. We need something new. And so there was a lot of growing ire among all kinds of people at that time. And then through the Depression, unions were working really hard to organize people who were employed to gain power and to structure that power through organizing together. So by the time that World War II came around and suddenly massive employment, people are joining unions like crazy, more people are back in work than they've been for a decade, and more people than ever before are unionized. And this is really important because unions were an important structure for pulling that power together, demanding that things really structurally, fundamentally change because most people can't meet their basic needs with the liberal economy the way that it was. And so through the war, just as a tiny example of how powerful unions were during this time, in 1943, right in the middle of World War II, at any given time, 1 in 3 workers was on strike in Canada. And it was not only because they were demanding better working conditions for themselves in their current employment, but also demanding really important social programs like healthcare, which we have now, like public healthcare. And so the diligent organizing that took place through the 30s and into the 40s took advantage of that moment of rupture during the Depression and during the war, where most people, sure most of us at that time would have been like, wow, this really isn't working. We need to really fundamentally change the way that our society is organized. They took all of that energy, turned it into power. And by the time the war ended, and because of all of that organizing, when the war ended, there was a huge ushering in of investment into public services, for example, healthcare, which came around in the 60s. So this is obviously an ultra simplified history of about 30 years of a lot of things happening. But the point I'm trying to make is during that moment of rupture, there was an enormous effort towards organizing people into effective structures towards a specific goal that resulted in quite a lot of change that ushered in a new big word, the Keynesian era, where instead of saying, work hard, good luck, tough bananas, the dominant idea underpinning society was we should spend public money to benefit the public through goods and services like healthcare. So this is a really big example of rupture from the past. And I'm just going to run through a couple other examples of somewhat less well-known histories of rupture and response. But here we go. We're in the I do my slides. There we go. We're in the Maritimes. Anyone from Indigenous area? Yeah, Nova Scotia. So around the same time in the 1930s-ish era, in Nova Scotia and in Cape Breton especially, there were a lot of like company towns. There were like coal barons. There were people who were the like fish, I don't know what to call them except barons. They were like fish barons and farmer barons. And so all these people doing the hard labor of mining, fishing, farming were like, hey man, I'm working pretty hard. I'm not getting a lot out of it. What the heck is this about? And this started up something called the Indigenous movement, rooted in Indigenous, where St. Francis Xavier, St. FX University is. 2 central figures there were Moses Cody, for which the Cody School of Development is named after, and his friend Tompkins, whose first name I'm forgetting, sorry guys. But they started up this movement where they were working with people at kitchen tables all around the Indigenous and Cape Breton area, where first they were prioritizing making sure everyone could read so that everyone could participate in business on their own behalf and not just be at the whim of some baron. And then they also organized into co-ops so that people could start having control over how they were selling the products of their labor. And this really sparked a movement, not only that was important in the 1930s, but carrying out through today. This is how we have so many of the cooperative stores and associations that we have in Nova Scotia and in other places in the Maritimes. So this is an example of people taking that moment of rupture of like, hey, I don't want to give all my hard-earned wealth from my labor to some guy who's going to take it and just be rich. I want it for myself. And together people organized to change that. Fast forward, I don't know, 80 years. This is a photo. Oh, honey. This is a photo from Elsipogtog, nearby First Nation to here. This was around 2013 when a big company called SWN was coming in to explore for fracking or hydraulic fracturing in New Brunswick. This was also happening in Nova Scotia. And so a number of Mi'kmaq folks from Elsipogtog and other First Nations around the area, they reoccupied some of their land, some of their unceded territory to say, no, we don't want you to frack here. We live here, actually. And so this went on for many months until this is a photo of the RCMP coming very early one morning to disrupt that blockade. But what happened is this is an extremely iconic photo. It's iconic, at least in this neck of the woods. I don't know if folks from further afield are familiar with this. It also became this illustration, which I have on my wall and love very much. But this became such a clear illustration right at the moment when Idle No More was happening, and there was a huge awakening around the need to reconcile with the First Peoples of these lands that we live on. There was this extreme demonstration that those rights were absolutely not being respected in this case. And this was a turning point in what turned into shortly after a ban on fracking in New Brunswick, except for a small portion, a ban on fracking in Nova Scotia, and one in PEI. Unfortunately, the Premier of Nova Scotia is a little nuts, and he just arbitrarily took away that ban 6 months ago, which was shameful. But the point still stands. When people organized together around this and creatively demonstrated the story from their eyes that their rights were being trampled, great things happened, and they won that ban on fracking. Even more recent, some of you may remember, does anyone remember right before the pandemic, there's this like huge moment where the Wet'suwet'en Nation was trying to fight against this pipeline going under their river in BC. And then all across the country, there were different kinds of blockades or really disruptive activities to draw attention to the fact that their rights, again, were being extremely trampled. So this is a photo from somewhere in Ontario of a train blockade, which was blocking the transport of goods and also people. There were a few also in the Maritimes and I know out west as well. This again is an example of people coming from all across Canada and carrying out one unified tactic to demonstrate their solidarity with this nation, which resulted in the at least delay of that pipeline being built. And then extremely recently, some of you may have, like me, watched very closely to see the progress of the global flotilla to Gaza. And this one really, this is such a special example to me because people from so many countries, there were 200 boats going across the Mediterranean, just regular people taking their regular boats to try to deliver food and aid to people in Gaza. And while not one of the boats from the flotilla made it all the way there, their goal was to make sure that people in Gaza had food. And because of their intervention in this genocide, the Israeli military became so preoccupied keeping the boats from landing on shore that people in Gaza were able to fish for the first time in 2 years. And so while the food didn't arrive on the boats, it arrived because of the boats, which is really special. So these are all examples where people have either taken a huge moment of rupture, like the one we're in, and driven in some specific change through organizing, like specific change like healthcare as a program, but also change people's minds. Like, we deserve healthcare. We deserve to have public programs. We shouldn't be told tough bananas. We should take care of each other. This is the kind of real mindset shift and material change that can happen when we organize well together. And then all of these other examples also are like driving cracks into the ruptures that are always happening because the system doesn't actually work and people usually notice, but not as widely as people are noticing now. So I've been saying this word organizing a lot. What even is that? This is a quote from Marshall Gantz. Marshall Gantz is an American leader in social justice movement, specifically around migrant food workers, especially in California. And he now has a school of social justice change, something, at Harvard. So he's like really legit. And oh my God, his definition of organizing is that organizing is a leadership practice that enables people like us to turn the resources that they have into the power that they need to make the change that they want. So I love this because it doesn't define organizing just as like something that happens one day, but as a leadership practice, and that comes with skills that we can develop. So he breaks this down to include 5 really core organizing skills that I find really helpful to think about because it also, usually not all of these skills live in just one person, and it takes a team to bring this set of skills networked together to really win. So Marshall Gantz says that organizing people to build the power to make the change that we need relies on 5 main leadership practices. One is storytelling. This can kind of take a couple of flavors. It can be the story I told about my neighbor Mickey to make the point that I think this is a moment of rupture. It can also be a story about yourself, of why you're motivated to try to make change as a means of bringing other people along with you to feel like they are also agents of change in this time. Storytelling about the kind of future that we want and that we know we deserve and can build together. These are the kinds of stories we can own and tell as leadership practices. Actually, I have a better slide for this. Yeah. So when we actively engage in storytelling and take on that leadership practice, we feel like we're active agents of change. But when we let our stories be told by mainstream media or, I don't know, some company, we feel like passive agents where things are just happening to us, not people who are making things happen. So storytelling can be a really powerful way to make people in your movement feel like we're actively leading change. Building relationships is an incredibly important leadership skill for organizing. When we have strong relationships with each other, we can get through the inevitable disagreements or challenges that we'll face as we're trying to make change in the world. We can get through a tough conversation about whether or not we agree on a certain resolution, and we can keep working towards a common future after getting through that. But without those strong relationships, we'll likely remain divided or become divided. Structuring teams is a leadership skill that I have that I lack many of the other ones on this slide. If we have structured teams who know what the goal we're trying to reach is and know what our specific contributions, meaningful contributions within that are, we together feel a huge sense of purpose, like we're spending our time on something worthwhile. We'll feel filled up and we'll feel like we're moving somewhere, and likely we will actually move somewhere. But when we don't have structured teams where it's not clear what the goals are, or it's not clear why any particular person is there, why they're valuable, then teams can start to either drift apart or have mission drift, start working on too many things. Any number of things can happen. So structuring teams in a productive way, huge leadership skill for organizing. Strategizing is another one. So we talked about organizing as starting with what you've got to build the power you need to get where you want to go. How you do that, that's the strategy. So you do need a credible plan from getting from where you are to where you want to be. This is an incredible leadership plan or leadership skill, and having people understand that how they fit into that plan gives people a real sense of initiative that makes them stick around. And then, but if we don't have a good strategy and we're just like, well, we're here, and in 10 years, we want to be over there, we have no plan in between. Every time something happens in politics or in your community, you'll just feel like things are happening to you rather than you're helping them happen. And then taking action. This is the stuff, this is showing up, pound the pavement, doing your events, turning people out. This is where we can, when we do it well and we have that leadership skill in hand, we'll feel really mobilized. We'll feel like we're building something. And if our actions don't make a ton of sense, or they're too few and far between or whatever, it can feel really demobilizing when those aren't turning out the results that we want to see. So I don't know if any of this is news to anybody. I just find this framework of thinking about organizing really helpful in just understanding the very basics of what it is I might be trying to do at any given time. And I'm just so glad to share some of what I've learned through my years of organizing with all of you. And I'll stop there because I really want to hear what you think about any of that, or if you have any questions. Thank you.
Un immense merci. Oui, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de... premièrement, tu as réussi à faire la présentation dans un temps vraiment limité. Tu as partagé vraiment beaucoup d'histoires duquel on peut bâtir puis s'inspirer. Puis en même temps, je note vraiment de l'importance des mouvements sociaux pour apporter, oui, des changements matériels, mais aussi dans les façons de penser. Puis je suis d'accord avec toi qu'on est dans un moment clé en ce moment où on est en mesure de faire ça parce qu'il y a des gens qui sont à la recherche de changements au statu quo, certainement. Donc, je vais inviter les gens qui auraient des questions à se présenter au micro. Vous aurez 2 minutes pour poser votre question, puis Robin pourra y répondre. Donc, j'ai une question en ligne pour commencer. Donc, Don, si tu veux poser ta question.
Hi, Robin. Don Saperis calling from Ontario. Thank you for the presentation. I read a book called "The Future is Degrowth." It describes there is a movement in Europe, a pretty powerful movement in Europe, that contends that the pursuit of increasing GDP by every country is the cause of our environmental and pollution problems. The book describes how up till the mid-50s, countries used to determine their needs by asking municipalities, towns, cities, do you have schools? Do you have bridges? Do you have hospitals? Do you have running water? Do you have sewage? But ever since the mid-50s, governments have all adopted the fascination with increasing GDP at all costs. I'm looking forward to Mr. Galbraith's talk next week with the CCPA. I am a CCPA member, but just wondering if this movement, you're talking about networking, but it seems that there is a lot of people in the world that don't get attention, that are organizing and are really questioning this addiction that we have to GDP at all costs. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. And this is and just speaking sort of laughably, this is basically a follow-up to the 1972 Club of Rome limits to growth that said that anything more than zero economic growth is a detriment to the environment, and to climate and to people eventually. Thank you once again.
Yeah. Yes. GDP is not smart. Thank you for this question. It also gives me an opportunity to make the clincher point I meant to make at the end of my presentation, which was you kind of alluded to it. So what I was trying to make, my big point of all of that is that I do think this is a moment where more people than I've certainly ever seen before, people who are maybe like normies or don't normally think about politics or whatever, they're like, oh my Lord, I got to do something about this. And that doesn't mean that those people are immediately going into action, but it does mean that they're ready to be invited in. And so I think our job as organizers, especially in progressive movements, is to get organized ourselves so that we have the structures to invite people into, that they will feel productive, helpful, welcomed, and that they feel like they're part of something that's building a better world. Because on the other side of that spectrum is an extremely regressive, sometimes fascist other side of people who are organizing, who are very ready to pull those same people who are looking around for answers about what the hell to do right now and pull them very hard to the right into very scary and isolated, a more divided society, where instead of saying, oh my God, I can't pay rent, I should really work with my neighbors to make that better for all of us, they're pulling people to a different place where they're saying, oh my God, I can't pay my rent and I should blame it on immigrants because it's definitely their fault. And so coming back, so anyway, the idea there is like people are ready to be organized, and it's the job of people like us in organizations like the NFU or other democratic organizations to be doing that organizing very effectively to pull people into our progressive movements. And when it comes back to GDP, I think, GDP is not good. Like it's not helping us as a measure of society's progress. It's the only thing it does is show how much money people are making, which is, we know, incredibly unequally distributed and doesn't equate to whether or not you have a bridge and running water. And so like personally, I think that's not a useful measure. And the way that GDP and that whole line of like capitalist thinking is so embedded in global society, I think that right now, a more effective demand to organize around that will be more relatable to more people probably has something more to do with being able to afford the basics of life, being able to access and afford food, making sure we have decent quality of life, because those are such pressing issues for people. I think that's where we'll have a lot of traction in organizing. And that will give us, once we have done that, then we'll have the power to make gains that improve people's material lives, and then maybe get to tackling GDP in the future. But my sense is strategically, if I was talking to someone who was struggling to pay rent and saying like, it's the global GDP that you should blame, they'd be like, no, it's not. It's my landlord. I can't afford this. So I agree with you. Like GDP is a problem. It's not a useful way to measure what we're doing, but I think there's more welcoming places to start when we're organizing around food, around farming, or around any issue really that people are facing right now. Thank you for that question. I don't know where to.
Merci beaucoup. Je vois qu'il y a beaucoup de gens en ligne pour poser des questions. Donc, si on peut être bref dans les questions, ça nous permettra d'avoir plus de discussion. Je vais aller au micro numéro 1.
Hi, Marshall Buchanan, Local 330, which is Ontario. My question is, can we use our legislative structures to our advantage, as Kathy mentioned this morning? And I question the validity of the Corporations Act because it's allowed corporations to externalize everything that's not about making more money for the corporation. And we can change that act, I imagine. And maybe we can imagine a better Corporations Act that requires stewardship of externalities instead of dumping that in some form of pollution into the environment or on the backs of innocent people. And why is it taking so long to rethink this legislation?
This is a great question. I think that legislative strategies can work, and I've seen them work plenty of times. They, I think, need to come with a very strong strategy that includes an understanding of who is trying to block the change that you're trying to make. So who is not interested in changing the Corporations Act? Probably quite a lot of large corporations. And so part of my thinking, again, I'm not really in the like agricultural world, but I would take a guess that much like the climate and fossil fuel world that I'm used to, there's a pretty obvious set of corporate actors who are always in your way or always or regularly shaping legislation that affects you directly. And so I would look first and see if what you want to do is change the Corporations Act or some other piece of legislation, what corporate bodies would immediately jump to the fore to try to stop you from doing that, and then assess how you could challenge them in that. They're obviously very strong. They have a lot of money, but they're not perfect and they're not impenetrable. And so what strengths you would have, part of the strategy making skill that I was talking about would be about assessing who your opponent is and where they're weak and where you're strong. And I would hazard a guess that most people just like farmers and they don't like corporations. And so using something like your personable nature and connection and community would be a strong tool for combating the power that corporations have to stop you from accomplishing whatever legislative change you're trying to make. That's a massive generalization, but that's what I would think. Thank you for that question.
Merci. Je vais prendre une question du micro numéro 2.
Thanks, Robin. I'm Jessie from Region 1, District 3, Nova Scotia. And I have a question geared more along the lines of organizing itself. we all know that we're living in a time of interlinked crises, and in food systems and agriculture, there are so many directions that we could focus our attention right now and our advocacy. And I also know, the NFU is an organization with a lot of ideas and a lot of policy, which is a strength. But in terms of organizing, it's also a challenge because we are a limited organization with a fairly small staff base and a relatively small membership in the grand scheme of things. So what are some strategies for channeling our energy towards kind of mobilizations and advocacy that can be narrowed down? I think that there's obviously not going to be one answer for this, but I'm just curious from your experience, how have you found strategies to coalesce across very broad, moments in time? And I guess I'm speaking specifically to food systems and agriculture, but in your experience, what have you done?
For sure. This is an excellent question. This is a very good question because there's so many problems. Like I saw even just in your resolutions, the breadth of issues that are on your minds are so wide and so legitimate. And when it comes to that strategy making, the question that I'm really interested in as an organizer is what issue and what kind of what solution to that issue is going to be broadly appealing and also life-changing for people, the most number of people that you can access. And so I'll just tell a short story, as is my way. When I was working at the Council of Canadians, I was part of the leadership team there for a while, and now I'm on the board of directors. But when I was working on staff and in the leadership, we had the same kind of but we had the same kind of situation where we had a huge range of interests. And then around 2021, the federal government put forward, they said they were going to make national pharmacare happen. This is including healthcare, medicine into the public healthcare that we already have. And we had 15 campaign options on the table. And the choice we made was to focus very tightly on pharmacare because already life was so unaffordable. I think in 2022, inflation was 7%. And the price of medicine went up 30% in 10 years. There were just these really real pressing daily issues people were facing around the cost of medicine. And so while we had this many interests, we decided to focus so much of our campaigning time for a couple of years on pharmacare, which resulted in a couple of things. We weren't the only organization working on it by a long shot, but we did contribute to winning that legislation passing. And now in 4 provinces, birth control and diabetes medications are covered and free for people. So that's a material change in people's lives. Through the organizing we did, we were able to make 5,000 phone calls to the Minister of Health in the week before the legislation came, which I know did make a difference in what that legislation was. And we were able to bring in a lot more people that we didn't know before because we were talking about something that was so bread and butter for so many people. They were like, I might never have heard of your organization before, but I'm in because I want that medicine to be free because I can't afford it. And so we were able to really grow the organization that way. And at the same time, one of our strategic decisions was informed by the fact that if, like I said, there's corporate villains in every sector, and in medicine, it's the pharmaceutical industry. So there's these massive corporations, some of the biggest corporations on earth make so much money in Canada, not just in the United States, because medicine is so expensive. And so what part of our strategic thinking was if we can make medicine, or at least some medicine in Canada, free, it will massively cut into the profits of those pharmaceutical corporations, which will take down their power overall to continue messing with our healthcare system in general. So it will set us up also better for the next fight. So not only would we be able to make people's material lives better in the short term, we would set ourselves up to win more on healthcare and pharmacare in the future. And so that was the set of decisions and kind of context that helped us go from, we care about all of this, but the place we can make a real material impact and also build our power so we can make more difference in the future is on this one particular issue right now. I don't know if there's one particular thing for the NFU or if there's 2 or 3, but I think it's a hard balance to have an organization that can hold care for people in Gaza and care for Black and Indigenous farmers and talk about all the other resolutions that you were talking about, and then take all of that and say, and where we're going to have the most impact is right here. That's how I've dealt with that challenge in the past, and it was good. It was all right.
Thank you.
On a une question en ligne. Donc, Karen, tu peux poser ta question.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Because of my age and having grown up in Europe, I was really struck by hearing World War II just from a Canadian perspective. It's not comparable, but it does ring bells, like intergenerational trauma. I mean, that went on for quite a while after World War II. And right now, though, how do we deal with the what is definitely surrounding us, the rubbish about Canada, Europe, and other democratic countries? I mean, any of them look at themselves? No, it's just a propaganda tool. So how do we deal with that? And also another question is, people whom you partially disagree with. I had that experience, similar perhaps to what you had, finding myself in a long distance taxi ride in England. And the person, I probably would have switched off if I hadn't been shut in a taxi with him when he started to blame things on immigrants. But then I started listening to the rest of what the man had to say, which was very pertinent. So also, it's two questions: World War II and no, just World War II. Europe and what surrounds us is one question, and the other question is finding how do you find the positions of convergence between somebody with whom you may have quite substantial disagreements, like value disagreements, on another level. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mention the war as a means of comparing the suffering that happened then and now, but as a mention of a time of upheaval. So I want to honor that the experience of World War II in Canada and in Britain was completely different. On the second piece, I think that it's funny because there's so many, one of the 5 leadership skills I mentioned was structuring teams. And that's coming back to me with your question about how to talk to people who you really fundamentally don't agree with, because I think there's so many ways to do that. We don't have to only imagine that as each of us taking on the responsibility to personally convince somebody to change their values, because I don't think that is really realistic. But in building our strategies that inform the kind of teams that we structure to make the change that we're trying to make, I think that gives a real kind of playbook of how you might talk to somebody. Like my neighbor Mickey, for example, we agree. It sucks that Pfizer didn't pay their taxes that year. We also disagree on a ton of other things because he says rude stuff to me all the time. And so I don't think that we have to pretend that we're going to change people's values. I think it's that we need to start planning our organizing strategies at the base understanding that there's more in common between the 99% and the one than there is the 1%. I can't remember who said this, but it's if we stop looking left and right and start looking up and down, we get a lot more in common with the people around us. And so, yeah, I don't think it's now we all need to go convince our conservative neighbors. I think it's we need to create structures where those conservative neighbors can still feel that we have a common goal in mind. I think that's what I think about that.
I lost my mic. That's why I'm here. So we have 5 minutes left. So I'll take one question from mic 1, 1 minute, and then one question from mic 2, 1 minute, and you'll have final words for about 3 minutes after that.
Oh, geez.
He's keeping us on track.
Hi, Dean Harder here, Manitoba. I really like your what you put up on 5 organizing practices. I really wish we could have more time to delve into that, even as an organization. If it's possible, maybe another workshop of times would be great. Or with I'm part of the membership development committee, and there's other committees want to know how to organize. I also really respect your point on like finding that one major campaign. For us, it's sometimes been Seeds was one where it's like this is our major one for a while, but it can't always be. Well, we have these mini actions and that we all want to do. I'm a working group on right to repair, and yet realizing that we do need this focus. And how you come to terms with these things is important. So I think it's really great as a membership right now. To understand that as a board, this is what they're up against. So I think take this in. If there's more you can talk about that with all these things going on and maybe around these organizing practices would be helpful.
Thank you for your question. Are we doing 2 questions?
Okay, one quick comment, and that is that I am delighted with, and have been for years, with the fact that the NFU does feminism. But I want us to keep in mind that patriarchy, which is the opposite of feminism, the patriarchal structures and the patriarchal assumptions that frame everything we're living now, top down, domination, submission, all that, those are patriarchal principles. If we forget to make the link between that and, somebody on top and others somewhere else, whether racially or gender-wise or whatever, we've got to keep in mind, not necessarily flaunt it, not necessarily always talk about it, but certainly keep it in mind, because if we don't address that root problem of power over rather than power to, then
I've upset this sweet child by trying not to have him fall off the stage. Yes. Okay. The first question was, let's do this more. Let's do this more. Call me. I would love that. Yeah, I think that like the more we can find specific issues that will motivate more people to join, the like more specific we can be about the thing we want to accomplish, the more likely we are to succeed in both accomplishing that thing from a policy perspective, but then also changing people's minds around it. And it's like, it's not easy. Like that pharmacare example I gave was like sent from above, how perfectly all those pieces align. So like it's not easy to find those moments, but looking for them is critical. And all the actions that you do kind of in a disparate way outside of that or before that, it is also helping to set the groundwork for when you need to make the big push. So like none of it's a waste by any stretch, but like getting the big win is also like winning one is really nice. It sucks to lose all the time. It's really nice to win one. And then on feminism and patriarchy, I think that, yeah, the 5 leadership qualities that I put up, I'd be happy to share the slides and more if anyone wants to see them. But I think all of those things kind of come together around groups that can function without that top-down leadership style and understanding that we're all working on this together. And so it just breeds more equality built in. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but I had a great time talking with you all. I'll be here until 4:30 and I would love to keep chatting. Thank you very much.